The bikes that you're building for these events, I know they can go for crazy money. What's the most ridiculous price tag you've seen? Not necessarily on one of your bikes, but that you've come across in this world of vets motocross racing or vintage racing?
The Thor RC 500 Reaper Store. The guy wants it.
Jesus Christ. You could buy a Lamborghini for that, can't you?
Yeah.
What's up guys, I'm Max and this is 999 Laser. In today's video we've got something very special in store for all you vintage two-stroke lovers. Doc Wobb is a world-renowned name in the dirt bike scene. He's a superstar mechanic and bike builder that has worked for the likes of Robbie Reynard and Roger DaCosta. He's built bikes for an endless list of history's most legendary riders. He's produced bikes for the likes of John Michelle Bale, Jeff Ward, Jeff Emig, Jamie Dobb, Ryan Hughes. The list is endless. His museum-worthy machines are raced annually at the VMX Nations event at Farleigh Castle. But Wobb's story stretched further back than the inauguration of that event, way back into the heyday of 80s and 90s motocross, both in Europe and America. In this video we'll be meeting the man himself, hearing some of his wildest stories, drooling over some of the most beautiful bikes in the world and disbelieving their price tags. And maybe we might just get a sneak peek of this man's treasure trove of motocross memorabilia. Let's enter Doc Wobb's bonkers dirt bike laboratory and meet the man that saves the two-strokes. Rob, it's great to finally meet you. Obviously we've been filming your machines for many years now at the Vets Motocross the Nations, so it's good to finally put a face to the genius behind those bikes. Let's start easy. Wobb or Rob, what do you prefer to go by?
To be honest, I get called all kinds of stuff. I've got so many nicknames from different jobs I've had. Some people call me Penguin, some people call me Factory, some people call me Elvis. It just depends. But Wobb, when I was at school, I got called Wobbly. That got shortened to Wobb. Then it got made into Doc Wobb for the magazine when I did DBR. So I answer to everything. Doesn't really matter.
So these days, I think it's safe to say that most people know you through Doc Wobb Imports, through your work that you do at the Vets Motocross Nations. When I was doing research coming down here, I was pretty surprised to see that you were involved in the magazine industry and dirt bike magazine industry. But I was also surprised to see that you worked for Smith Optics as well. How does a lad from Worcester who raced AMCAs going up end up working for Roger DaCosta, end up signing big name riders for Smith?
You just got to really want it. You just got to really want to do it.
You've had a crazy varied career, right? Yeah. Can you just tell us through like kind of the Doc Wobb story and how you've ended up here?
Started off racing AMCA. I mean, I was at school. My dad helped me originally buy a trials bike when I was like 15, but he was never into it, for him. Bless him. I didn't start racing motocross till I was 17 because I could drive. Did that for a couple of 3 years, run out of talent and money. About the same time was the Farleigh Castle Grand Prix where Thorpe came from last to first, and I was stood behind.
What was that? Well, I'm going to show my age here. 86, 85. Yeah, that was a good guess for me, to be fair, I reckon.
And I was stood behind Keith when he came from last to first, and I'm stood there thinking, that's me, I want to do that.
Keith, what is that, his mechanic?
Yeah, David's dad. And that was a pivotal moment for me, from being a rider thinking, I think I want to be a mechanic. Yeah. That's when I decided I wanted to do that, and then you start asking around. Luckily I knew Rob Andrews because he was local, and then I got a job helping out Mervyn Anstey at French Internationals, and then, I mean, I was properly out of my depth the first few years because I've had no training.
Just learning on the job, yeah.
Learning on the job, and you get the jobs which require somebody who knows what they're doing, but unfortunately I didn't, so you have to just wing it. Tell
us how you kind of moved from being based here and then you went, do you go to Europe first or you go straight to America? Basically,
the job straight away in Europe, you just like Grand Prix mechanic. Well, you start off being a French international mechanic. They don't have them anymore for tax reasons, but they used to have international races in France, like random days, like Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and you'd go there and it'd be like a Grand Prix paddock. We started off doing that, and then you get a job as a mechanic yourself and you're just trying to get through it, you know?
So that was in the late 80s, early 90s?
Late 80s, early 90s, and then I was dealing with a guy called Terry Good in America, who was the importer for Technocell. He got me set up with a privateer in Florida called G Numac, and I just got my tools and went on a plane. And
so full privateer setup?
Full privateer setup, but what I ended up spending longer with Brian Swink at his house, Because Gene, as cool as he was, had his girlfriend with him, and it was like 3 of us. It was a bit weird.
Third wheeling.
Basically, yeah. And so, you know, we'd come back from practicing and he'd be with his girlfriend, I'd be sat on my own. So that was kind of my first connection in with factory Suzuki. I got to know.
Swink was on factory
Swink
Suzuki.
was factory Suzuki at the time, yeah.
And then you got a call from Roger?
No, that was a few years later. I came back.
So you came back to Europe?
Came back to Europe, and then Paul Emerson called me about going out. He was factory Suzuki off-road. Yeah. So we went there the end of '96 and worked with him for '97. And then the opening came up at Primal Impulse 125 factory team. Mike put my name forward to Roger. I knew Roger pretty well from my time in the States anyway. But Roger's was great with me. We had, at the end of '98, we had issues with work visas for no fault of my own. It was all political with LaRocco's dad and Ian Harrison didn't get on and they tried causing problems. Well, we all got caught up in that. Yeah. So.
Right, so here we are in Rob's man cave. Is this what it's called? The man cave, the office?
Really, it's just my office where
it's
I work every day.
Your personal little museum of motocross treasure and dirt bike gold. So Rob's going to give us a little tour around some of his favourite pieces he's got in the office here. So take us away, Rob. Show us what you've got.
So some jerseys when I was at Smith. Mike Brown, Pichon, Tortelli, Luss.
So these are all riders that were signed to you?
Apart from the McGrath. I got that because we were up at the UP 300, which was a big like trail ride in Michigan with Parts Unlimited, and he had one pair of goggles, no tear off. So I put tear offs on his goggles.
This is like post-retirement?
Yeah. Well, no,
Six.
something like that. And so he gave me that, which is nice because he's a legend.
So is that you and Michael Essie?
Me and Lacey on the start line at Glen Helen. That was the race where he tried to jump on Tedesco's bike. It was my last ever race with Smith full-time in America, and he was on the start line and he had Matt Walker pull up one side and Langston pull up on the other. And I remember saying to him, kid, if you ever pull a whole shot, now's the time. Yeah. You need to get away from these boys because they got it out, they got it in for you. There's a lot of green around us. And I got no affiliation because I get on well with them boys, and I'm just like, you need to get away from these people. Yeah. Because their job is to...
They've got one job out here today, yeah.
And it's not, and you got Matt Walker who's good at that stuff. Yeah, and I'm like, you need to be away from them. And I remember that, we were listening to his iPad. He's a lovely kid, he was young, and a lot of people got bad things to say about him. They were cool with me, speak as you find, you know. David Bailey's jersey, Glover's jersey, got given those over the years. 93, New Max Swink.
So this is the first season you was in the States?
This is from winning the World Supercross in Brazil with Reynard. He didn't want to take it home on a plane, so I did. This is from winning the championship in the States. That's what they give you, just stuff.
It's crazy that, like, how many times did Robbie Reynard win that once in Brazil and he didn't want it? It's crazy when riders.
These two are from the nations teams, 2 years on the trot. Because as a Smith,
let me try and guess what years.
That was in Budds Creek, that one.
Budds Creek, James Noble was at Budds Creek.
Yes, he was.
Oh, that
was 08.
7, 8. Then.
Yeah, and then because that was a Smith, we had 3 guys, English guys, on factory contracts, and for 2 years I had both of them on the nations team, so I did all right.
Just talk about that season with Robbie. Then you was factory mechanic for the young superstar coming up. Yeah. In the 125 class, right? 125 class. Just talk a little bit about that season. What was it like sparring for Robbie Reynard?
Intense thing I've ever done. How these guys do that year in, year out, because you start testing in like November and you're still racing the following December. We've had like 2 weekends off. Yeah. And Robbie was a big kid, so quite hard on the bike, as big kids are. And we were trying to, you know, race with Carmichael week in, week out. I mean, you couldn't.
Who's a little kid?
He's a little kid and super fast, super aggressive. And Robbie, on his day, was super quick, but them days were few and far between. But towards the end of the Nationals, they started coming more and more often, you know? You
kind of see in the motocross media, and you see the stories of the pressures on the ride and stuff, but you never really hear about what it's like for a factory mechanic at that level and what the pressures are going into a race weekend or even a championship weekend. What are the pressures on a mechanic like at that level?
It can be absolutely miserable because you've got 1,000 things to remember.
Yeah.
And if you remember 999, you're the worst person in the world. Yeah. Southwick, the bike ground to a halt, and they wouldn't let me go and get the bike back. The deal is another mechanic has to go and get the bike back in case the things run out of fuel or the plug caps come off. So you get the bike back. I say, oh, I think the stator's gone bad. No problem. Take it off. Send it to Japan. Test it. Nothing wrong with it. So I get a written warning. Yeah. Okay.
Because you're
at fault. You're at fault. You said what's wrong. That's not what's wrong. You've made a mistake. Well, luckily Ian Harrison then contacted Japan, and it was found to be they were. Once they got warm, they broke down. And then another time we had a problem at High Point. Same thing. Bike ground to a halt. They made me go and get it back. We took it apart under the semi, and you know, there's people everywhere. You're taking this motor out, thinking I can get sacked here. I don't know what's happened here. Took it out.
You don't think of that from the outside. That
oh my God! Yeah,
if something goes wrong, mechanic's job's on the line.
Oh, you take your shirt off and get your toolbox. You're gone. You stood in the field thinking, how did that happen? Yeah. They're very ruthless, rightfully so, because they've got a lot of riding on it. So from then on, we had to put a piston in every time we rode the bike. So every time we sat on that bike, I had a piston, clutch, reed block, serviced the rear shock, and brake pads, new fuel, new tank, new graphics. I mean, the bike's been rebuilt in like an hour and 20 minutes. How the thing didn't fall apart is a miracle. You know, it's like, and everybody thought we were cheating. Oh my God, it's really intense. And when you won the championship in Italy, you know, I'm sitting on the start gate with the #1 plate at my shirt. Suzuki haven't won anything for years. DaCosta's there and Gabor's is there. It's live on TV, and I'm just sitting with my head in my hands thinking.
This is for the World Supercross.
For the World Supercross.
So you're sitting there #1.
Just with my head in my hands. Everybody else is jumping around, and I'm sitting there thinking, God, please, just one more lap, one more lap.
And what was the feeling like when he did clinch out then?
Relief.
Is that the highlight of your Spaniard
pretty
career?
Much. Yeah, you got to have to say that. That year was the highlight of my year, really. You know, if anybody asked me any questions, that's the best.
Yeah.
Not because, you know, I got on with loads of riders, but just the results we got and the amount of work we put in to eventually, towards the end of the Nationals, just flat out beating Carmichael.
Not many people can say that, can they?
Not by luck, not because he fell off, just flat out beat him, you know what I mean? And there was times, like at Millville and whatever, the kid was 4 seconds a lap quicker than him every lap. And then, you know, the group behind Ricky was, you know, John Dowd and Jimmy Button and all those guys, and he's just reeling them in. And you're just like, oh my God, this is cool. So that was a good year. The RJ, the stuff he gave me at Bercy.
So this is, we was talking about this earlier. This is the
that's the stuff when
the
he came
kit
out,
that started
that big metallic hand. That's the stuff he was wearing.
So this is probably the first piece in your collection, is it?
Yeah, pretty much. That's when I started collecting stuff. Sheik lived with him, one of my favourite people. Various number plates. That was Maynard's stuff from US Open in '98 because he was on Answer all year. Then he signed for Fox. Mike Brown from when he was at Cass Honda. Special made bar pads. One Union Jack, one for the Nations team. And McGrath, King of Supercross bar pads. Can't buy them. The Ruva Coppins from Rinaldi Yamaha. Yeah,
6 or 7
like that. Front end plate off side panel off Carmichael's bike. The only time he ever rode 125 on factory bike was when he was at Steel City one year, and he won the 250 championship, and they let him ride 125.
Going from being a factory mechanic, then you ended up at Smith Optics. How did that happen, and what did that job entail?
You get to know the guys from the different companies. With the riders I work with, you get to know the people at these companies, and they were looking for somebody to do the rider support. And at first you're like, oh, I'm a mechanic, I don't really want to do that. And you think, well, instead of looking after one guy and your weekend depending on his results, you go from looking after like 25 guys. Well, you're always going to have a result somewhere, aren't you? You know, I underestimated it. I thought it was going to be easier than it was. I mean, you think goggles was easy, but they're very particular. There's very few. There wasn't like two pairs the same. They're very, very funny about how they had to be, and you had to get these guys' trust, you know. So yeah, I was there 9 years in total, not full time. I was 3 or 4 years full time in the States, and then I looked after Europe and I flew backwards and forwards. But I was 9 years in total. And
during that time, were you in charge of like signing riders up to represent Smith?
Yeah. The week after I started, Denny Stevenson started. And his job was more the signing up, and my job was more looking after him once they'd been signed. I mean, they were probably the best years of my career. Fun. Yeah.
Moving on to transition to your kind of third career there. Yeah. A magazine editor. How's that come about? You started just doing kind of
DBR like 99. Tony, the editor, approached me about doing like a technical how-to feature. And it was how to stick stickers on, how to do wheel bearings, how to bleach your brakes. And then at the end of '03 it must have been. I was in Vegas for an MGM Supercross, and I got approached by a guy called Tim March, who I kind of knew, used to be BMX world champion, and he was working for a publisher who was doing a BMX and a mountain bike magazine and a skateboard magazine, very cool magazines, and they wanted to do a motocross magazine, and they needed somebody to open doors basically. I'm no editor. Well, I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. They're like, we don't need you to be, we need you to give us recognition straight away. Well, of course, that's not a problem. So I agreed to do it because it was bi-monthly, so 6 issues. I'm in the truck, so as long as I've got internet, I can work.
And you're working on what was the early stages of moto.
Basically getting motors set up, and like the very first issue, we got full pro circuit race bike test. They don't do that very often.
Yeah. And that's through your connections.
Because I knew them, basically, and I'd guarantee them the cover, and I'd guarantee that, we went and tested that, and we had like 17 minutes to ride the bike. And once the time was up, it was up. Yeah. We got Finbar there, and he went out on this pro circuit bike, and he came past me the first time, just screaming, "This is cheating!" And he said the thing was like a 250. It's like a 252 stroke. The power is just ungodly.
And this is 03 or 04?
This would be 03, yeah, 04.
So who was riding that? Tedesco?
It was Tedesco's race bike, yeah.
So during those years, you're juggling Smith, the editing job.
Yeah.
And then
that's how the import thing started as well, because I was getting paid in US dollars. So I'd buy the bikes from the teams in US dollars, ship them home in a container at the end of the year, sell them in the 2 months I had off, then go back and start again.
So what you do now started back then, really, then?
Kevin just went gambling with him, and he gave it to me, in fairness. This is funny, this is off Metzger's bike when he did the backflip in Sheffield.
I was there that night, I was 7.
And I put my sticker upside down on it, because I knew full well DBR would want a picture of him upside down. So if you actually see that poster, my sticker's the right way up.
That's marketing there, that is. I was there that night, I think I was probably 7.
Yeah, that's crazy. Reader stuff, front plates, McGrath's helmets, Tommy Searle stuff when he first won in Sweden, I think it might have been. Pro circuit, aluminium pipe, and he ever made 2, don't work.
That's a rare piece, that is then.
There's only 2 in the world, yeah. I got one and Mitch has got the other. And Carmichael stuff, never rode number 1. That was the year 98 that he rode one for the Nationals, so that's a set of his gear from there. And you go to the helmets, and across the top are pretty much my helmets from when I used to do magazine stuff. The third one in there with the flames on, that's Jason Bonham's, whose dad was the drummer in Zeppelin. The other helmets are all custom ones, which the guys I work with. There's signed Pastrana ones in there, and Billy Lyles, and a couple of Ryan Hughes ones, and Emigs, and Dobbs, and Mackenzie's, and DeRuvers, and... Oh, let me show you this helmet first. See that number 4 there?
That was, when I was a kid, that was the helmet that everyone wanted, that paint job.
The helmet Carmichael was wearing when he went over the bars. Was it 04 Anaheim or something like that? And he smashed it, that's all smashed up. That's the helmet he was wearing. Scott Taylor gave me that. So that's the real thing.
As a mechanic then, and at Smith as well, and through your magazine work, you worked with some legendary names in the sport, and some of history's most famous riders, names that will go down as legends. Yeah. What are some of the wildest stories you can tell about them on camera?
I can't tell a lot. I lived with Scott Sheik. I lived with Scott Sheik for a little while, and that was probably the funnest time I've ever had. And Scott was factory Honda at the time, and he was the only guy on there because McGrath had gone to Suzuki, and he was full-on factory Honda, the only guy. And me and him had so much fun. It was crazy. So that was fun times. And then with Smith, with Denny, once you're in with Denny, you're in with Emig, and you're in with Buddy Antonez, and those guys are rock stars, believe me. Yeah. Rock stars.
Living the life.
Yeah.
I can imagine the Vegas after parties back in the day were something else.
Massive, yeah. You can't, in every week, my truck, we used to have, Red Bull used to send us a couple of crates of Red Bull, and I'd get through like 3 or 4 litres of vodka, and it was like a who's who in my truck. It was like you couldn't get your head around. Like Ricky used to come to Loretta's in between nationals, and we used to get drunk. I mean, yeah, when he was racing, yeah. And this was like a Tuesday night at Loretta's, and we'd be getting...
So you've been around in the industry, obviously, since the late 80s, and both here in Europe and in the States, the scene's developed and changed massively. Where do you think the sport's changed most, over there or here?
I think it's such a different thing now. It's like in America, this one-day nationals thing. Like we used to get to the nationals on a Friday, and we'd sit and barbecue on a Friday night. It'd be a 3-day deal. Now they get in Sunday morning, gone. Well, Saturday morning, gone. We used to get in the team mules and go around the campsites, and we had so much fun,
When I was a kid, it was always like, the 90s were the time when McGrath was king, and it was party time, and then Carmichael came along, and it was time for work then.
Basically, Carmichael screwed it all up by training,
From the way I can see it, motocross in the 90s was like F1 in the 70s.
Yeah. It was definitely a funner time to be around, I think, from my experience of it.
So that's another question of mine. Obviously, you've got all this stuff, you've met all these people in the industry. Do you still get starstruck at all, or has that worn off since '87 when you was at Bercy for the first time?
It's worn off a little bit because you see these kids, you've seen these people as kids, and they're not, you know, you see Villapoto or Carmichael, you know, you see them on 85s and stuff, and they're just kids really. Yeah. So that's took the edge off it for me a little bit.
Is there any riders that come to Farley that you're like, oh Jesus, yeah, that's
RJ, cool. I can't believe I'm friends with Rick Johnson. Yeah. That's freaky.
So he would have been the man back when you were starting out.
Oh my God, he was a massive hero. I got his gears down there from Bercy in '87. First time I ever saw him, we were in the Honda pits. And because I was with Mark Banks, they put all the Hondas together, all the Suzukis together, and whether what nationality we were from. We were just the other side of this metal barrier from like Rick Johnson and his mechanic Brian Loomis. And I'm just like, I'm more starstruck with his mechanic, I think. And I got talking with RJ, and the Fox guy came over, gave him a load of gear. And I was like, oh, I want some of that. How'd you ask him? And I was like, well, what are you doing with that after the race? He's like, you can have it if you want. And that's when oh my God. And I remember I didn't want to ask him. And we were packing up and they'd let all the public in. It was chaos in the pits. It was just, you couldn't, I was more worried about my stuff getting nicked. And I'm trying to gather everything up. And I look up and RJ is holding this gear above his head. And all these people trying to grab it. He's like, no, it's for him, it's for him. He kept pointing at me and I'm like, oh my God. So I got it. And I'm like, what do I owe you for it, kid? He said, get me something from your hometown. What the hell do I get? You know what I mean? Probably 4 years later, when I went to the States, well, it would have been 5 years later, I live near Worcester, and there's Worcester Porcelain, which is in Worcester where the Queen used all the stuff. So I went to the shop, bought this lovely vase thing. I'm like, I don't know what to get. Thinking if I go to the States, I might bump into him. I had that vase in my gear bag and in my truck all year, and I bumped into RJ at Vegas the last round. He was there with his monster, like his off-road truck thing. And I went up and found him and gave it to him. And he remembered me, and I give him that, and he still talks about that now. He said,
and the vase survived.
Yeah, didn't get smashed. Yeah, it's amazing, really. And he said I was the second person to ever give him something back. Now my wife Claire's friends with his wife, and
it's like kind of that. How did we end up here? Kind of.
How did I even get friends with a guy who I used to just think was God? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but he gave me that gear back in '80.
He's a nice guy. So
what we got here?
Robbie's Factory 125 Suzuki from '98. I've got the stickers for it, so I haven't stuck them on. Trouble is, once they come up to the office, nothing gets done with them then. It's even bent from the last time you crashed it.
This is a cool one that you were talking about earlier.
81 125 Yam. I wanted one when I was a kid. My dad wouldn't buy me one, so I got one now. That came up on Craigslist in California. That's unrestored. We didn't do any. That's how it came.
That's how it came.
I cleaned it, but that's all. CR500 aluminium frame. There's a big deal with Service Honda making them, and I'm like, no, we can build one better than that. Paul Emerson's championship winning bikes from the US. That's how it finished the race. Paul didn't want me to put new stickers on. There's not a sticker on that bike that he didn't race with. That's got the tyres on, everything. And then the helmets up there, they were from Star Racing when they first signed for...
You've got Austin Stroop, Carlton Regal, Gareth Swanepoel.
Yeah, they were the whole
Ryan
team.
Morris, is that?
Yeah, they were the whole team. And they had a contract with Rockstar, I think, and the deal was for maybe 3 Supercrosses in Anaheim, they had to wear them helmets with no other stickers on, just the Rockstar stickers.
I was introduced to your work through Farley Castle and the bikes that you produced for that race. What are some of your favourite builds or best builds from the years since we've been going, since 2011?
I mean, the best year for us was last year, I think, with Mike Brown.
There's Chesterfield Jams.
Chesterfield Jams, they look nice. Mike rode well. You know, it was a good weekend all round. It wasn't wet, everything ticked all the boxes. You know, building a bike for Jean-Michel Bale was a big one for us, because just again, he's a hero, you know. And just to build a bike and give it to his mechanic, there you go. You think, oh God, you can, you know.
I've heard a story about that bike, that you'd found some special part.
Cylinder, yeah, the cylinder came from Pro Circuit. Mitch knew we were building a bike for JMB. He's like, I might have something for you. We went upstairs. So we're upstairs above his office where he keeps all the old junk, he calls it, but it's boxes and boxes of stuff there.
Of treasure.
And he doesn't really let anybody in there, but he's cool. So I'm in there and we're digging out pipes and we're buying stuff. And then he's like, are you building that bike for JMB? Yeah. So he's digging through. And he came up with this cylinder. He said that was on his bike the last time he raced in Australia. And then he gave it to me, we built it. Mitch made us a special pipe which smoothed the power out. And then when JMB was going down to the start line, he goes, I haven't done this for 22 years since Australia. I'm like, well, now you mentioned it, it's got the same cylinder on the bike. So he was great. JMB is a super nice guy.
That's quite impressive from Mitch Payton's kind of like his encyclopedic knowledge of his junk upstairs, that he knows he's just got this random cylinder he's got up there.
Yeah, very much so. As a business, I see what Mitch has achieved, and if I can be 1% of that, I've done all right. he's one of the most fun guys to go drinking with.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But he's
There's
also
always stories of him and K-Dub going gambling and stuff in.
I've been involved in a bit of that as well. Yeah, it's scary.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I was in Vegas one year with me and Jeff Emig, and I had both his watch on as well as mine because he was that drunk he wasn't sure, and we went into the Hard Rock, and they're gambling there. So I'm sat down with them, and Emig's too drunk, and he's giving me chips, and I'm like, what? I don't know what I'm doing. And they're gambling like $1,500 a hand. Yeah. And there's Kevin there and Mitch is there, and I'm just, I don't know what to do. Like, yeah, you know, like 1,500, $2,000 a time, just throwing it in. I'm like, don't know what I'm doing. And Emig's giving me instructions, like one eye closed, trying to see what's going on. I'm gambling with his money.
Oh, that's
and
right,
then
isn't it?
After a bit, Kevin said to me, look at the door, kid. I'm like, what door? He's like, so I'm looking up, and somebody went out, and it's daylight. I'm like, what time is it? And it's like 10 o'clock in the morning.
No.
And we've been going since midnight the night before.
I don't want to think about how much you've spent of Emig's.
I don't even know. Don't even know.
It's not worth thinking about.
Couldn't put a number on it. Nothing to do with me. Don't know.
Let me guess this Villapoto one in the middle, what year that is. I'm going to say Matley 2006.
Exactly right, yeah. So that was that's the gear that he crashed in. And then the Stewart stuff is the day that from Unadilla that he landed on Carmichael. Everett's was from the beach race. Last time he raced professionally. So this is I used to race one of these in 1984. Ex-Rob Andrews Grand Prix 250. He hated it, I loved it. And then Jamie Dobbs' helmet from Farley when he had it custom painted, same as his old race helmet. Jean-Michel Bale's helmet from Farley. Billy McKenzie's jersey, Brownie's jersey from this year. Picture of me with Robbie. Don't know where we were, but he looks not very happy about something.
We know that vintage racing or Evo racing, the bikes can be a bit problematic.
Yeah. Well, they weren't reliable 25 years ago. They're not reliable now, are they?
Exactly. Are there any bikes that were particularly troublesome or any years that were particularly stressful for you at the Vets Motocross of the Nations?
Problem is, we go down there untested. We run them in the field, you know, but they got to look nice. We can't be ragging them around the field. And so the first time, say, Mike Brown says the bike is on a Friday and he just rides it up and down the road. It seems all right. So we're trying to stop the thing falling apart as well as trying to set it up in like 5 laps of practice. Everybody else has been practicing and testing and riding for months, and we're going down there completely untested with a guy who's never swung a leg over the bike before, which is why our results tend to improve as the weekend goes on, because as they get used to it. I'm convinced Mike, the speed Mike was going last year, he'd have held his own at a Grand Prix. I'm convinced of that.
So in 2012 then, I remember that there was a lot of KX500s there. How many did you build for that year?
I wanted to build 6, but I couldn't find a 6th one.
What was the process of trying to build 5 KX500s? Was that like the craziest lead up that you've had to?
Yes and no, we like to build more than one bike at a time anyway. You know, we'll build 2 CR500s together because it doesn't take twice as long to build 2 as it does 1. You know, everything was lastminute.com, but it all turned out all right.
I think we might have been the first time they had like big American stars like Ryan and Jeff obviously coming over, and they was in the big truck, and
it was a game changer.
And then the racing, Ryan that year was him and Werner de Witt.
It was a good race.
That was one of the best races motocross races I'd seen to that point, like in person. You think, yeah, that was good.
The bike wouldn't have done another lap. Bike was knackered.
Are there any bikes or specific bikes for riders that you haven't done yet that you really want to do for that race?
I'd love to get Denny Stevenson and Antonez and all them over. I think that'd be fun. It would be fun, there'd be no question about that.
And what bikes?
Probably not the massive star power that a lot of these guys want. I mean, if Carmichael came over or McGrath, they'd want so much money. Because like Carmichael screwed up the job with his training, and McGrath did the same with the money. It used to go to Bursley, it'd be like a who's who. Not so much now, because all these guys want so much money to do the job, which I understand. But like McGrath demands good money. I don't think he'll ever come. I don't think anybody's going to pay him to come.
So talking about money there, everyone likes to talk about money. These, not specifically these ones, but the bikes that you're building for these events, I know they can go for crazy money. What's the most ridiculous price tag you've seen? Not necessarily on one of your bikes, but that you've come across in this world of Vets Motocross racing or vintage racing?
The Thor RC 500 that we restored. The guy wants 150 grand for that.
Jesus Christ. 150 grand. You could buy a Lamborghini for that, can't you?
Yeah, and I know I've had a guy offer me 90 grand for it, and the guy's like, not even close.
So that's Dave Thorpe's factory.
Dave Thorpe's factory, 86, the
World Championship winning bike.
Yeah.
150 grand.
Whether it's worth that or not,
yeah,
it's another matter.
but
That's the number.
That would be the headline though, isn't it?
That's the number.
What do you think makes a good bike restorer then? Is it attention to detail or knowledge of how things were back in that time? Because do most people say I want it exactly how it was when it was raced in 1987?
Attention to detail is a big thing, I think. And it's got to be right. And you can't be, I'll get back to that. No, you've got to.
How do you work just from like memory, or do you have like pictures of the bike that you're like, I'm trying to make it look just like that? Or
we do look at pictures when we're first doing it. Then you remember basically. And I was that kid staring into the trucks, and I was there taking it all in.
Well, when you said earlier about when you met RJ and you was more starstruck by his mechanic, that's like a true student of the game, that is, isn't it?
And the things like, we built that bike for Pouzar, for example, and we're like, well, what colour frame is it supposed to be? Burgundy. Okay, well, what colour burgundy? There's a million colours. So I want a Macadie Rinaldi.
What colour burgundy?
What colour was the frame? And his words to me were like, we went to the paint shop with a cigarette packet. He didn't know what colour it was. He took him the fag packet, and they're like, it's got to be that colour, and they mixed the paint. He's like, all right, well, we can do that. So then they said to us, oh, it's too red. I'm not going to Macadie, it ain't. Yeah. That's the colour. Yeah. He told me to paint it, you know. So, you know, luckily we've had some input from the right people.
And I think those reasons is why you're obviously in such high demand. The last question for me is, I've heard that there's some crazy waiting list. If you want a Doc Wob bike, you've got to wait a long time. What is the queue for a Doc Wob bike?
38 bikes in bits here. We work about a month a bike. So what's that, 4 years? But half of that belongs to me, so that can get bumped back.
Right, mega. So, Rob, thanks for having us down today. Thanks for showing us around, showing some of your bits and telling us your stories. If you want to check out Rob's website, the Titanium, Doc Wob Imports, I'll put a link in the description down below. As always though, I've been Max. This has been 999 Laser. Remember to like, share and subscribe. Check out our merch store if you want to pick up some merch and support the channel. Until next time though, I'll see you at the track.